I hate ego. It kills businesses. It builds red tape. We had one policy which I loved, which was we'd rather have a hole than an arsehole in the business. And for me, ego equals arsehole. You know, the secret sauce of Gymshark, it was building a community like no other brand. Super disruptive, super agile. I made way more mistakes as CEO than I got right, believe you me. To take a business from 4 million to 400 and then to get unicorn status. People say to me, the CEO, that's got to be your defining moment. The $1.5 billion, whatever it was. And at the time I was like, yes, this is my life journey sort of coming to like a crescendo.
Today's guest is Steve Hewitt, former CEO of Gymshark and founder of Whanau Advisory, a consulting business dedicated to helping entrepreneurs scale their ventures into world-class companies. In 2014, Steve took the reins as CEO of Gymshark, and with his game-changing vision, he transformed the brand into a global phenomenon, driving it from around £4 million in revenue to over £500 million and scaling a team to over 1,000 people in just 7 years. His leadership reached new heights in 2020 when Gymshark also achieved unicorn status, hitting a staggering $1.5 billion valuation. After moving on from his time at Gymshark, Steve brought his expertise to the clothing brand Passenger as a non-executive chair. Through Whanau Advisory, he continues to support brands like D.Louise Jewelry, guiding them to new levels of success. A proud Geordie from the northeast of England, Steve now lives in Worcestershire with his wife Jo, their 2 children and their Labradors. Join us as we dive into Steve's incredible journey of brand transformation, pioneering growth, and the bold vision shaping the future of business. Steve, great to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Since you've walked in, you've just got positive energy, and you don't get that from everyone. So, I'm feeling it. So, thanks for bringing that today.
Well, listen, if it's improved your day, then I'm a happy man. So,
well, look, Steve, lots to cover today in your career as we look backwards, but just before we got started, we kind of looked through a bit of a graph of your life. How is that exercise for you without going into too much detail? Do you look back in your life much? How does it feel to?
I've not done that exercise ever. And just going through the exercise, actually, you definitely forget some of the great memories you've had because maybe you just take them for granted. Yeah. And you definitely forget some of the bad stuff that's happened or stuff that you would have improved for sure. So, I'm 51 and I've never gone back and done that exercise. So thanks for taking me through that, by the way. I feel like I've just had some therapy this morning, to be honest.
Well, we'll continue that because it's been interesting across our guests. There's been almost a split of some people who never look back, they exclusively look forwards, and others who really look back. So throughout today, I hope I can kind of take you back a little bit. Yeah,
I definitely do a combination, I think, of both, but there's moments where you do it. But actually, I've never, as I said, never really sat down to do that sort of in a structured way. So it was great.
Okay, well, let's start by going all the way back then, because I want to start with, what is your earliest childhood memory? Young Steve growing up, what do you remember?
Yeah, so I'm from a big Irish Catholic family. So, family was the center of everything we did. So big gatherings on a Sunday after church. Come from a wide family. So I've got older sister, older brother, younger brother, where even now we're all super competitive. Yeah. My mum, as I say in the Northeast, used to joke that if you're quiet, then you're going to be the last mouth to feed. So you had to really sort of stick yourself out there. And early childhood with the family was table tennis on a Sunday afternoon. We used to have a house championship, and I think even now, even to this day, we're still arguing about who is the house table tennis champion. School life and particularly football, particularly sport, played a massive part. So one thing that back then, certainly in Catholic primary schools, sport was such a important thing. All about discipline, all about trying your best. So being part of that school football team was really important.
And you mentioned there about being competitive. So who drove that then? Was that always in your family? You mentioned there your mum was saying, what's the saying up north? Shy bairns
getting out.
Right, exactly. Which to translate that, kids who are shy don't get anything, right?
Yeah.
that was always instilled from a young age, hence speak up.
Yeah, funny enough, I've actually had some artwork commissioned in my house with a big portrait which says "Shy Ben's getting out." Interesting enough, my parents weren't competitive. I think it just came from probably the sibling rivalry, and it started from there really. And and then football definitely. And I would rather would have died than sort of losing it in a tackle or scoring a goal or saving that goal line shot from the opposition. So I think it's always been embedded in me.
So you're always very competitive, clearly, growing up and into your teenage years then. And then I suppose you then decide to head off to university, which did a lot of your family go off to uni before you?
No, I was the first one in my family, certainly of my siblings, to go.
What inspired that?
Good question. Probably brave enough to just try something different. Sort of being obviously in the Northeast for my entire life up until 18. Really, we did actually go off to Zambia when I was really, really young, but I was too young. When you sort of say, can you remember your childhood? I was so young back in Zambia, I can't remember that. So I think probably sort of seeing my older sister, older brother maybe not go away meant that I should go away. So yeah.
So you moved it to Manchester. So you moved down not too far from the Northeast, but far enough to get away. So what did you decide to study and why did you study that?
Yeah, I did a business sport degree. Again, I was sort of sport obsessed, or anything to do, and the sport element of the course was sports coaching. So that was my first sort of probably look into and touch point with trying to inspire and motivate people. And then obviously the business side was obviously really important as I went into my sort of latter years.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, I'm just looking at your graph here because I know I've jumped to university, but down here we've got a bit of imposter. What's that feeling of failure?
Yeah, so I remember one of my epic moments was captaining the football team. It was a really proud moment for me, probably proud moment for my dad at the time. It was the thought of, and back then I really wanted to make it as a footballer. And I was good, but I knew it wasn't going to be quite good enough. So, pretended to then not love football as much as I did when I was growing up, probably to manage my own expectations of not making it. And that I talk about imposter all the time in business, and I see it a lot. And what you work out is actually showing vulnerability is a real superpower. And I wish I knew that at the age of 51. Knowing that at 51. Now, if I could apply that moving back, it would have probably saved me a little bit of pain, I think.
Well, I know later I want to go into that a little bit more because there's so much that you've done as a leader and changing cultures. So what I think we can all learn from you. But zipping back in then, so university's happened, you moved to Manchester. What was life like there? Because I know there you met your wife, Jo.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about Jo and how you met.
Yeah, we happened to be on the same course. She had a boyfriend at the time. I had a girlfriend back in Newcastle at the time, albeit that never quite lasts. And I remember sitting in a lecture, hadn't met her, and she happened to be sitting opposite me about 30 yards away. And that saying of love at first sight, you go, that's not possible. And it's exactly what it was. It was love at first sight.
So what, did you go and approach, or what happened?
No, we actually were part of the same friendship group for about 2 or 3 years. And then we sort of, I can't remember even who made the first move. I think probably a combination of both.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Answer, hey. So you go through university, and what was Steve like at uni? You'd been quite competitive growing up, had this imposter, so you started to manage your expectations of yourself. Yeah. Did you get into football at university?
Yeah.
What were you like?
Did football at university, albeit liked it, didn't love it. It was too much, being honest, too much of a drinking culture. So listen, we all had a good time at university in terms of, parties and probably not just the experience of growing up. Yeah. But the football and the sport university was secondary to the actual forced drinking, and you sort of, we see it with the initiations of, and I was just like, this isn't my thing. Yeah. What I did learn at university is how important a friendship group is. So there was around about 8 to 10 of us who got together, all from different backgrounds. A couple of Geordies in there as well, which definitely helped somebody actually understanding my accent. And that was a mixture of sort of boys and girls, males, females. And that friendship group is still together. I remember my mum, both my parents went to university up in Sunderland. And I remember my mum saying to me, you know, when you leave university, you're probably going to stay in touch with maybe one, maybe two people if you're lucky. And 30 years on, we're still as tight as we were as a group of sort of 8, 12 of us or whatever it was back then. And I remember my dad saying to me, actually, and it's so true this, I see this actually in business as well, but definitely see it in personal life, and we try and sort of teach this to our kids now, even to this day, is if you show me your friendship group, I'll tell you your future. And I think if you knock around with not very good humans, the likelihood is, or there is a probability you end up becoming a bit of a bad human. And I think that goes either way. I think if you knock around and hang out with people who have got a good value set and just know how to treat people, then I think you also fall into that. So for me, university was probably one of the best sort of sets of years of my life. Yeah. Definitely learned how to be more confident. I remember my mother packing me off to university and I was like, I don't really want to go. And then it took me 2 weeks to call her because we were partying that much and having such a good time, to the point where she actually had to call the university to make sure I was still alive. She still tells me that story to this day. So my university years were absolutely epic. I wish I could go back and relive those 4 years and probably wouldn't change a thing.
It sounds like you lived them to the max then. You enjoyed them, right?
Oh, yeah. Listen, got a decent degree. Yeah. Could have done it way better. I remember asking my dad for some money for some textbooks. Yeah. And it was actually to fund our skiing holiday, boys' skiing holiday. And I remember when I finished university, he came to pick me up. He was like, where's all the textbooks that you bought? And I was like, yeah. And he sort of smiled at me as if he knew anyway. So yeah, but yeah, great set of 4 years.
Now, I think throughout this conversation, actually, is going to be like a lot of lessons that I want to draw in on. And one of them you just mentioned there, you know, this drinking culture at university. And I see this in society today, that there might be a friendship group of good people, good values, but that one person says, I don't really want to drink anymore. It's not my vibe. Yeah. But they might feel, you know, peer pressured into it. Like, I very confidently will sit there and take water. But for somebody who's not that confident, who's feeling that at the moment, what would you say to them?
You know what? You know, you have to blaze your own trail. My daughter, who is 19, she's just gone off to Cardiff University last year. Yeah. Not a drinker at all, but yet she's going into that whole freshers fortnight and the university netball team, where there's probably a bit of emphasis on, well, the only way you can have a good time is by getting drunk or drinking. You don't even have to, you know, get drunk. And I think you have to have show the vulnerability to your friendship to say, listen, I'm happy having a great night out. Actually, I don't need a wine or a beer or a cocktail to actually have a good time. And in my view, if your friends are the ones who try to put way too much pressure on you, and actually maybe joke and make fun of you for not doing that, then maybe you've got the wrong friendship group at that point. The real friends will actually go, you know what? I love a beer and I love a glass of wine. So I don't have the self-discipline, as I said, not to have a beer or a wine occasionally. But if one of my friends said, listen, I'm going to come out and not drink, it's like, I'd be like, fair play. That's awesome discipline. Yeah.
It's fair, because I read once somewhere, it's like, if people respect you, they'll respect your no, right? And clearly, as you say, if they don't respect your no, they don't really respect you. And do you want to be around those people? Yeah,
and you know, it happens way too much. Much. And it's probably harder now because of, for young people growing up, because of social media didn't exist when I grew up. So I think it's much harder now for certainly my kids growing up than as I said when I grew up, for sure. So yeah.
So going back to university, finish university, and just tell me a little bit about that next chapter, because I know in 2001 you joined Reebok Europe as commercial director.
Yeah.
What took you to Reebok Europe?
So before that, I said earlier, business with sports. The sports element was coaching. And I got the opportunity to go and work for an organization called Challenger Sports.
Okay.
Of all places in Kansas City. So Kansas City is renowned right now for its American. In fact, the Chiefs now are famous because of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, right? So, but Kansas City was renowned for a good football team, American football team, and barbecue food. So I ended up in Kansas City working for Challenger Sports because I was obsessed with. I found that coaching. The impact you could have on an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old girl or boy who was playing soccer back then. Soccer for girls back then was huge. And just seeing the impact you could make on a kid's face and on a kid's life, it might be even a shy kid, the kid who's actually a little bit vulnerable, to actually make them feel like $1 million by the end of that coaching session. So for me, that was the sort of before Reebok, that was my first, I was in business, but didn't feel like I was in business because I just enjoyed that role so much. But that 4 or 5 years of Challenger Sports, and two guys in particular, a guy called Peter Arch and Alan Jones, who up until lately have been in that organisation still, were two guys who really believed in me at the age of 20, 21. They took a bit of a gamble. The company had spent a lot of money on my visa. And it was a big risk for them, but they took it and they backed me, and we're still unbelievably great friends today. So, but that world before going into Reebok was so important because you got to understand one thing, the importance of sort of people and the ability to try and inspire people to make themselves or make them feel like they could be the best version of themselves.
And you also mentioned there that these guys backed you as a 20, 21-year-old or whatever. You've done that obviously a lot in your career that we're going to get onto, then backing younger people. Are they linked in any which way? People who believed in you and you kind of...
Because certainly when I was at that age was an issue. It's like, well, you had to be at 40 years old or you had to have 10 years worth of experience. That allows you, you've got a great CV, you've got some decent social skills, but the one thing you can't or you don't have to get the job is experience. Well, then that becomes an impossible thing. So for me, that was probably the first example where, we're going back to the sort of early 90s where nobody was taking that risk on young people. And now age, actually, some of the best founders in the UK and best founders in the US are actually people who back then would have been deemed as kids and actually way too young to actually build a business. And yet it's the opposite now. So is that linked? That's a great question. Don't know, but probably somewhere in there, yeah.
I guess just interesting because we see so much of ourselves in people we might support and I just picture that.
Well, I love the underdog.
Yeah, me too.
I love the underdog. So, sometimes, and I've met some great business owners in this last couple of years. Yeah. And I don't know what it is about the underdog. You just want them to do well. Yeah. You just want them to do well. Yeah.
So on the graph as well, obviously there's a bit of a low here, if I'm not wrong, talking about your time whilst you were working there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So moved on from Challenger after 4 years, got the opportunity to work for Reebok, and that brought me back to Europe, which is good because back to my wife, Jo, she couldn't get a visa. So it was either I stay in the US and follow my own career or I follow my heart. And 2 kids, 2 Labradors later, you know who won there. So, but yeah, Reebok life was great. So one thing great and bad, and bad's maybe not the right word, but bad became a good thing in the end. So what was great about Reebok is that you learned to understand how a professional organization works. So Challenger Sports was like a decent sized SME, right. $30 to $50 million, a bit scrappy. Going from there to what was a multi-billion euro or dollar brand in Reebok, who were probably number 3 in the world from a sports brand perspective. Your game just had to get better and bigger. So it really helped me professionalize, really helped me understand the art of planning. So if you didn't plan, you got found out. So those are the sort of the things that really helped me, certainly help other organizations such as Gymshark in the sort of the later years.
Yeah.
But what Reebok also taught me was that the A players were the only ones who got looked after. So if you're the A player, the person who was super competitive, winning all the time, those are the ones that got looked after. You were in the clique or the club. And the people outside of that clique and club, i.e. the non-A players, I remember Reebok, my old boss, unbelievably commercial, but my goodness me, could not build the right environment. He thought he was building the right environment, all about performance, but it was actually shallow and short-term lived, because actually, although people performed, they sort of did it under a little bit of fear. And that didn't go for all of the Reebok society and culture. So I met some phenomenal people there who I'm still friends with today. But the lesson I learned from my immediate boss was, my goodness me, I learned so much commercially from him. But what I did learn from him was that if I ever got a chance to lead a team in an organization, I'm not going to do it like that. Okay. I'm actually going to back the underdog, or certainly give the underdog as much time in coaching and development and opportunity as the A players, because you absolutely need A players in your business, but you also need those underdogs to come through too.
Yeah. Now, I suppose that's going to weave us on nicely, because I feel like there's so much to cover here in so little time almost, is towards the Gymshark journey, where culture played such a pivotal role in the growth and your leadership. How did Gymshark come about?
So, at the age of 30, just been married, or 30, 31, just got married. We're lucky enough to have kids. So we've got Madison, who's 19. We've got Ollie, who is coming up to 17. Great kids. Family's a huge part of our lives. And I got some advice. I was doing a lot of air miles with Reebok. HQ was based in Boston, so back and forth on planes all over Europe. Great life, busy life. But I got some great advice which said, you only get one chance at seeing your kids grow up. Don't miss the opportunity. And so I took that advice. And I came out of that and effectively went into a little bit of consultancy. I did a couple of little roles here and there, with back more into the SME environment, actually. So back to where I had been with Challenger Sports, and loved the variety of helping different businesses. So some businesses who were fast growing, some businesses that were financially distressed, which I couldn't have done if I hadn't have had those Reebok years, to be honest. And I was known at the local David Lloyd Club in Bromsgrove, and that's something about in the water in Bromsgrove in this day and age. Back then. Where I was known as the Reebok guy. So it was like, oh yeah, there's the Reebok guy, the guy who's got that experience in that sporting goods sort of sector. Anyway, there was two young guys in there, Ben Francis and Lewis Morgan. So everybody talks about Ben as obviously the founder of Gymshark, but there was also a co-founder in Lewis too. And I met those two guys in the gym. They had done a phenomenal job. They were in year 1.5, maybe year 2. They'd built it to 7 people, average age 19 and a half years old. It was their high school mate and family. Ben's brother, employee number 1, Joe, great guy. And they came to me and said, we've got it to £4 million turnover, but we're not sure what the next step is, and we're struggling with suppliers. Nobody will take us seriously because the bank won't really talk to us. And so they said, listen, can you come in for just have a little bit of a look? And I was like, sure, I'll come in and have a little bit of a look. And really it went from there. Being honest, the first time I met them and spent time with them, and Ben will repeat this story, I found them really arrogant. Because you're 19 and a half years old, you've built a business to £4 million, you're the biggest thing in Bromsgrove. It's the most talked about brand in Bromsgrove, but outside that wasn't really talked about. Yeah. And after the first session, the guy who had introduced me, a guy called Paul Richardson, called me and said, how was that first session with the guys? I went, yeah, I can't help them, Paul. And he's like, why not? And I went, they're onto something. They're creating this, what I'd call, new era of brands. The brands I'd been involved with were very reliant on retailers and distributors, and it's all about product. Nobody was building a a brand based on community and the journey that became the influencer journey. Gymshark really pioneered that sort of element within that new era of brands. And he was like, "Why not?" I was like, "I can't work with arrogant people." I was almost a little bit back to my Reebok of this environment is not an environment that's going to suit me. It's like all full of A players again, and it was just a little bit alpha male, if I'm being honest. Anyway, he said, "Leave it with me." That we had another session with Ben and Lewis. I fed that back, and to be fair to Ben, he was like, "Okay, I get it. Let's listen to what you're saying." But even then, it was still a little bit arrogant. We went from 4 million to 8 million, and I remember in 2015, I was like, "Listen, guys, we're onto something here. We're starting to build one hell of a following." And Black Friday 2015 was coming. And I was like, I'm not sure Plan A, our software systems were not great.
Right.
And you could sort of see the frenzy building for this Black Friday event. And I was like, we need a Plan B because sometimes Plan A doesn't come off. And they were like, corporate dad. Like, I was the dad, my age, I was the dad at Reebok. I was like the comfort blanket. They were like, planning is for corporate organizations. And I know what they meant. Sometimes big corporate organizations can be slow and full of red tape. Yeah. But actually good planning, you can still be really agile with good planning. Anyway, Plan A didn't come off, the systems imploded. And we were in danger of losing about 35 to 40% of the customer base overnight. And I remember Ben, after a week of zero sleeps and a lot of DMs into his Instagram, was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, I asked him one question. I said, do you want to be the biggest fitness or biggest brand in Bromsgrove? Or do you want to be a true global player? I said, because the answer to that question will dictate where we go next. Yeah. And he said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, if it's the latter, we need to employ people who are better than you in areas where you think you're God. Now, you try and telling that to what was now a 21, 22-year-old, to me, kid back then. And he was like, let's go, let's do it. And to be fair, I said to him, I said, great. I said, but don't ever play the founder's card or the shareholder card in a meeting. I said, otherwise we're done. And he said, you've got my word. And Ben, from when I first met him, he was super arrogant, as I said, a little bit of a know-it-all. Over those next 6 or 7 years, he became this human who listened, who didn't always agree when we had some great stand-up rows, but he always reflected, always reflected. He was great at coming back the next day and saying, I know we didn't agree yesterday, but actually, here's my view now. Super competitive, but showed and began to show this humility that you wouldn't see in a ridiculously successful 20-something-year-old. Would I have been as humble as Ben at 25, 26? Not a chance. Yeah. And I think, fair credit to him, but we also built a team around him where if that ego ever got out of sync we actually just kept on clipping wings and actually became a thing. So you talk about, building environments and culture. I'm obsessed with, the secret sauce of Gymshark. Gymshark did lots of things well. As I said, it was a true pioneer in its sector. It was building a community like no other brand. And you get now lots of brands, like seeing Gymshark as the benchmark for that. And it was, and super, super disruptive, super agile. And all those things were important to its growth. Yeah. But the secret sauce was the value set. And that was really important.
And obviously you joined there and you met them when it was 4 million and kind of until you got it to 400 million. And that's a huge, huge growth spurt that went on. And behind that, I know you often said the words of, work hard and stay humble. Yeah. And you talk about environment, humility there. How did you kind of, when you entered the business and took over as CEO, get those, 5 words, work hard and stay humble, to make it feel something to everybody?
You know what? It's about treating people well. So back to, and I thank my parents for this, it doesn't cost you anything to stop and ask somebody how their day is. For me, it was spending almost no time with my own senior team. So obviously you'd spend your time with your senior team in leadership meetings every month, weekly catch-ups. Yeah. outside of that, I would actually go out of my way not to spend time with my senior team, because actually the people that you need to spend time with are, and again, one of the most important people I ever spent time with was the lady who was in charge of the queue in the Gymshark refuel restaurant every lunchtime. And I used to say to her every week, tell me the barometer, tell me what people are thinking, tell me what the vibe feels like.
And everything, right?
Yeah, she'd hear everything, and people would be super honest with her. So just really finding time to spend time with people who ordinarily a CEO wouldn't spend time with.
Yeah.
So I think accessibility is a superpower. So and I'm not saying people shouldn't have their own offices within a building, but for me, I never had an office because I wanted to be out there in the trenches, because you see things, you hear things that you wouldn't ordinarily see or hear if you have your own office, behind a sort of a nice bit of glass or in a boardroom, right? Yeah. So for me, it was actually spending time with a lot of people across lots of levels and across lots of functions within the business. So actually what I did get then was sort of a honest barometer of where we were.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd say is internal comms is a superpower. So a lot of brands spend all of their time talking about their brand, whether it be in the social media space and the in real life space, just what it looks like externally. And that's important. Your brand positioning to your consumer group is really important. But your communication to your own employees is way more important. I will say that good external comms, in fact, great external comms gets remembered maybe for 24, 48 hours, and then it's forgotten. Bad internal comms gets remembered forever. And people actually just don't stay with your business. So I am obsessed with communication within an organization. I think it's really important. And when I say obsessed with internal comms, not talking at the front as the CEO about what's going well and look what we've smashed out the park. It's actually sometimes going, you know what, I got that wrong and I apologize for getting that wrong. And then people go, well, if he's or she's going to do it, it makes it so much easier for me to be vulnerable. And now you've really got a superpower. So the one thing that we tried to do at Gymshark was to get everybody flying in formation. So you've ever seen Canada geese fly? Yeah. They're flying in formation. And one thing that was generally never out of formation was the word ego. So I hate ego. It kills businesses. It builds red tape. And actually what you do is you end up rewarding performance and not trust. Simon Sinek talks about this a lot, actually, if you ever listen to him. So for us, it was, you can absolutely be part of it if you want to perform here, but you have to be a good human also.
Define that a little bit, ego. Let's say somebody's listening and they think, I wish I could spot that a little bit more. How does it kind of manifest and show up?
Couple of ways, really, is don't be the smartest person in the room, because generally you're not. I'm definitely never the smartest person in the room. And I think that actually gives me an ability to do one thing probably better than most, which is listen. So really important. So the amount of people who come into an organization or part of the organization, and this happens at to be honest, you see this worse at the most senior level, where you've got a lot of ego and a lot of I'm the smartest person in the room. And actually that's generally protecting a little bit of imposter, actually, where actually they're the ones who probably want to stick their hand up to say, you know what, I need a little bit of help here, but they can't do that because of the environment that exists. The second is the old saying is, if I've been to Tenerife, don't be the person who's been to 11erife. Don't try and be the person who's just got something better than the next person. Actually, if somebody's got something to celebrate, let's celebrate with them rather than be jealous of that and resentful of that and try and go one better. Yeah. So we used to say, humans have egos, right? We've all got an element of ego, but our job at Gymshark was to say, if you've got an ego, then leave it at the door on a Monday morning, and on Friday evening you can pick it right back up, right? And it seemed to work. And we had we didn't have too many policies in that 7 years, fast years of growth that I was CEO, but we had one policy which I loved, which was we'd rather have a hole than an arsehole in the business. And for me, ego equals arsehole.
Yeah. But before they even get in the door, you mentioned before about hiring on values and not on qualifications.
Yep.
So somebody's listening, how would you do that? You're in an interview, people are good, put on a good mask.
Yep.
How do you unpick that a little bit more in an interview to hire on values?
I think the exercise you've just done with me this morning is actually something that an organisation can adopt. So look back in your life and quiz them on actually where they got stuff right, but more importantly, where they got stuff wrong. And I'm not talking from a performance point of view. I'm talking from a behavior point of view. And I said this actually to a leadership team of a brand that we're working with in Manchester. And I said, what's the first interview question that normally people start with when you're interviewing? Certainly for senior hires, but probably all hires, it's generally, how are you going to add value? Tell me about your track record. Tell me about your experience. Nobody starts with, tell me what's important in your value set. Tell me why you're even here for the interview other than we're paying you for the job. What's the one thing that this brand is doing that actually plays back to your personal values? And people go, you know what? You're right. Nobody ever starts with a value set conversation in an interview. So for me, again, it's a game changer.
Yeah.
And generally, actually, you'll unravel a little bit of vulnerability in that person. But I think that's a good thing.
Powerful.
And at Gymshark, what we also did is we had a unbelievably good onboarding process.
Okay.
So if you made it through the onboarding process at Gymshark, the first session was with me. It wasn't about growth. It wasn't about where the brand's headed. It wasn't about Ben. It was about, this is how we behave. Here's our values at Gymshark. So I'm just reinforcing that now. So I'm, to manage people's expectations of one of the reasons why they've been effectively brought into the organization. So they actually had to add value in that area, not diminish it.
Yeah. And so as the years go on, as you say, like the Canada Geese, everybody's flying in formation, ego's left at the door, that really, the culture environment changes. You get to this 400 million mark of revenue, and then 2020, keep me in check, that the valuation then was over 1 billion pounds. That's unicorn status in the UK.
Yep.
How did that feel?
You know what? I get asked this a lot. To take a business from 4 million to 400, as you said, and then to get unicorn status at the end of that. People say to me, the CEO, that's got to be your defining moment. The actual unicorn status, 1.1 billion, $1.5 billion, whatever it was. And at the time, I was like, yes, this is what I've been working. You go back to that life journey. This is my life journey, sort of coming to like a crescendo. Yeah. And actually, after about a week, I remember me and Ben having this conversation, going, "You feeling different?" I was like, "No," and he was like, "No, me. In fact, I feel like more responsible than I've ever felt in my working career." What I worked out is that the unicorn status was just the spit out of getting everything else. And I say everything else right. I made way more mistakes as CEO than I got right, believe you me. But we probably wouldn't have become the version ourselves without those mistakes. But for me, it was back to the reason we've got unicorn status is that we've put people right front and center of the organization, and we've looked after them. And again, Gymshark did lots of good things, but the secret sauce was the value set. Yeah. But we had this statement where we wanted to create an environment that everybody wanted to be part of. So think about that influencer, the bank, suppliers, employees from the outside. It was like something special is going on there. We've got to be part of it. Yeah. Now, I think my mum can do a good job of that. The hard part is the second part of the statement, which is once you're in, or once they're in, they never want to leave. Yeah. And growing Gymshark, we had people go on holiday. Yeah, I used to see them in the lunch queue on their holiday. I was like, aren't you supposed to? They're like, no, we've missed it so much. We've got FOMO that we've had to come in for lunch. And my goodness me, at that point, you've got something special.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was epic. So unicorn status, just like probably for most people, that would be the metric. Yeah. For me, that's a spit out of probably getting our North Star right.
Now, after that, because I want to go to the next chapter, obviously parting ways, but obviously still close to them, I'm sure, at Gymshark, but looking at Steve's next chapter in your life. Now, you then set up your new organization, and I want to pronounce this correctly, which is, we are Whanau.
Yes.
That's correct, right?
Yes.
It's a Maori word.
It is.
Okay, just checking. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so after 7 years of CEO at Gymshark and 7 years at Gymshark on a roller coaster journey. It definitely at times felt like more than 7 years. Yeah. Also felt like less time than that as well. Ben and General Atlantic, the private equity organization who had invested back in 2020, were like, can you stay on as chair? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And part of that role was getting Ben ready to become the next CEO, and really help him embed into that role. And I enjoyed that, albeit I also learned that being the chair on a board with the main role of governance was not quite my bag. So I did that for a year. I then agreed to stay on for another year to do a non-exec role, which and that was really me starting to really come at the chair role was more exec role. So I was in there still quite a lot. The non-exec role was sort of, a few days a year, always being Ben's sounding board, having dinner with him next week. So me and Ben are still close. But about 2 years after the deal, I was like, right, I need to do something differently. So I talk about mistakes as CEO. One of the big mistakes I made is that we were this phenomenal brand with this phenomenal business model where the maths really worked, hence the unicorn status, but we never gave back enough to charity. And I had a defining moment coming out of Birmingham on the train with my wife and a couple of our friends, and there was 3 young guys on this train, about 16, 17. 2 of the guys had their feet all over the seats, really super disrespectful. So back to my early life, being a working class Geordie, it was like, you don't put your feet on the seats. If my parents were, they would have literally slapped me around the head. So I didn't slap them around the head, but I said, fellas, is there any chance you can not put your feet on the seats, and any chance the ladies can sit down? And they'll, give you a little bit of grief, and that was fine. But one of the 3 guys was really quiet, and I just got chatting to him. And I said, why are you knocking around with these 2 guys? Back to that friendship group, define your future. Yeah. He was like, well, I've got no friends. And I was like, you may want to just rethink your friends. I'm not sure these guys are good for you. Anyway, we got chatting. Where do you live? I live in a village near where I lived. And I said, I know that village really well. Where do you live? He said, I live in a place called St. Basil's. And I was like, what's St. Basil's? And he then went on to tell a story about St. Basil's being a charity for the homeless, for the young. His parents had basically, really fell foul of drugs, and him and his sister ended up in this effectively dormitory in Kidderminster. Anyway, I said to him, what else do you do? He said, I do a sports diploma at the local college. And I was like, 16, 17 sports. He may have heard of Gymshark. So I asked him, have you heard of a brand called Gymshark? He was like, yeah. I said, do you want to work there? And he was like, I'd love to work there, but it's the hardest place to get into. And I said, I know a few people. I didn't tell him what I did, but I said, I know a few people, and I might be able to get you a week's work experience. Anyway, here's my number. He called me on the Sunday. I said, I've got your week's work experience. He was like, unbelievable. How have you managed to do that? And I said, listen, there's one thing I haven't told you. I said, I'm the CEO of the brand. He was like, he actually swore at me at the phone. Anyway, he came for a week's work experience. He then did such a good job in that week that we offered him a part-time paid role in customer service. And about 1.5 years ago, we found out that he went off to university. So sliding door moment for him, but more importantly, it was a sliding door moment for me. And I was like, if I can make that much impact with a 16, 17-year-old, like the underdog, I'm back to underdog, the underdog, for that underdog to come through and just be live a good life and be a good human, I was like, maybe we can sort of accelerate that. So I set up for now to really start doing that and start working with a couple of charities. One is St. Basil's, back to St. Basil's where it all started, I guess, and Birmingham Children's Hospital. We do a lot of work through a concept called the Changemakers, and we spend an awful lot of time trying to build that. But what you also find out is that in isolation is still not enough. And what I found out is that I really missed my sweet spot of helping SMEs grow. Yeah. So I got my old leadership team at Gymshark. Some that moved on. Ben was freshening up the dressing room. So some of them had moved on in that way. And I got them, we call ourselves the Avengers. Nobody else calls us the Avengers, but I do. We got the Avengers together. There's sort of 6 or 7 of us. And basically what we do is we go and help effectively the next Gymshark. Not in that sector, but sure. Lots of brands that are in that 5 to 20 million space who want to go off and internationalize or just be the best version of themselves. And we basically just take them through our mistakes at Gymshark in the 7 years I was CEO and just get them to apply that in their business. Yeah. but it's always back to flying in formation. So for now, actually, you said it was a Maori word. It means tribe. And if to take that further, it's a tribe flying in formation. And that's what we do. We get organizations to fly in formation.
Wow.
But values, always the center of everything we do. It's really important. So we have one red flag. If you've got an ego, we don't care how good your business is, we're not going to work with you.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been at that now for a couple of years. I stopped off the board at Gymshark last October, and it's been so much fun. So much fun.
And over the years now, obviously, you're having such a positive influence on so many founders, businesses, C-suite, their next stage. And I just want to look at you for a second, because people who had an impact in your life. And I go back to your dad, who I know passed away not so long ago, as we can see here as well. And I think he'd always said to you, he taught you to treat people well and value the important things in your life. What are those important things in your life today then?
Again, you hear this from your parents, and I was actually saying this to my son last night, and we were talking about friendship group as it stands, and weekends now are into that life where he's now starting to go out, and you end up taking this advice is if you don't lie, you can never get found out. And I think honesty is such a, if you think you back to anybody's life, that lovely, naive, honest period of like the ages 2 to 5 years old is fun. But after 5, you learn to lie, and you then learn to, not do things in the right way. I think what my dad definitely taught me is that money doesn't give you the right to do anything you like. And I've been in a lot of business situations where you get these super successful people worth a lot of money, and the way they treat people is disgraceful. I lost my dad actually about 4 weeks before we did the deal with General Atlantic, so he never ever got to see the unicorn status, which was bittersweet for me. But yeah, I think for me it's just honesty. Treat people. It doesn't matter what background, and especially actually spend more time with the underdog. I'm back to that word underdog. But the way you treat people actually, I think, defines you. It doesn't take any time or any money just to be nice. So you can actually build a super competitive business and still be nice. Doesn't mean to say you can't give them constructive feedback and some harsh feedback. But even when you do that, you do it in the right way. So yeah, for me, having the ability just to treat people well and be nice is super important.
I love that. And I was going to ask you a bit more that if people are listening and they're growing a business, what would your key advice be? But I think you've already touched upon it through here. Get the egos out of the business, make sure you're flying in formation, all of this stuff. Is there anything else that you would add that you like we haven't touched upon that really kind of...
Yeah, 100%. So any financial people listening in will, and Philip Dorr, who is my CFO at Gymshark, North Star is purpose, why you exist, audience, who you exist for, and then values is how you behave as a brand and how you behave as an employer and employee. Those three things in isolation can be fluffy, and that financial person making that comment would absolutely be correct with that. It is fluffy in isolation. So the other thing that you've got to do as a business, you've got to make sure that the maths work. So like the fourth bucket of a North Star is simply put, the maths have to work. So make sure that your model is ideally organically built from a cash flow perspective. Make sure it's profitable, because you might have the greatest purpose with the best value set in the world, but if you run out of cash or you're not profitable, it's a way more difficult environment to build at that point. So you also have to get the basics right on your actual fiscal model. So, and if you don't know how to do that, there is lots of great advice on there, through podcasts, through YouTube, through learnings from mentors, through, easy ways. So there's no excuse not to listen.
Yeah, fair. And speaking of growth and all those founders who are looking ahead, what do the next 10 years look like for you?
That's a great question.
Going off the graph now.
Yeah, I'm going off the graph now. I said to my wife, Jo, that I'm definitely going to slow down. Well, I've worked out I'm terrible at golf. Terrible game, golf. It's the only game I know where you try harder and you get worse. So definitely not going to be on the PGA or live golf tour anytime soon. I'm terrible at gardening. Really terrible at gardening. So I have to probably, whatever I do has got to be around people.
Nice.
As I said earlier, I think people build brands, people build organizations, people in your personal life. It's not about where you go on holiday or what restaurant you go to. It's actually the people who are with you on that journey. So for me, it's not so much enjoy the journey. It's make sure you pick the right people to go on that journey with you, and then by default you'll enjoy it anyway. So next 10 years, probably a bit of traveling for sure. But traveling where I actually get to see the cities rather than a hotel room and a meeting room.
Have you been back to Kansas City since?
I have once, and my kids now are obsessed with the Chiefs. My daughter, they love Patrick Mahomes, and we've promised them we're going to take them back to Kansas City and try some of that barbecue food. So it's definitely some traveling, but do a bit of traveling, but just spend time with great people.
Nice. Well, Steve, thanks so much. I feel like we've covered quite a lot, and I could go on and on. But obviously part of this show is that I need to discover what your superpower is, which puts me on the spot just as much whilst I'm listening to you. But before we go there, and I want to share it because I'm still bubbling a few things over, I've got a bit of a quick fire round for you.
Oh, love
and again,
this.
as I say on every episode, these quick fires are known for not being that quick. So first one is, if you could have dinner with any historical figure, or this could be anybody dead or alive today, who would you choose? I'll let you have 3 people at your dinner table, and why?
Definitely Nelson Mandela.
Oh, yeah.
There is how somebody can go to prison for that long in the way he went to prison and come out with the positivity that he came out with. I mean, I would be resentful as hell and probably would have this driven hatred of hurting everybody who put me there. And for somebody to come back from that, I think is unbelievable. So he would definitely be one. The second person, he's not passed, but would definitely be Alan Shearer. I'm a Newcastle fan, so I've got to have Alan Shearer there for sure. Yeah. And probably, that's a good question. I'd have my dad back around the table for sure. My dad was so inspiring.
Yeah. Oh, so we've got Shearer, Nelson Mandela, your dad.
Yeah, and my dad, in order, my dad, Nelson Mandela, and then, sorry, Al, you'd be third on the list.
Right, next one then is, if you could have a one-way ticket to any place in time, moment in time, it could be in the past, could be in the future, where would you go? What would you do?
That's a great question. I would go back to my primary school football team and knock that imposter out of me, knowing what I know now. And I think I might have gone on to do slightly better things in football. If I've got one regret, it's not backing myself. I was good, and I felt back then I wasn't good enough. And I think now, just having the vulnerability to back yourself, and if you fail, then, embrace it. Back then I didn't do it. So for me in my life, it would be my primary school football team. I loved my primary school days.
And I think I was going to ask you there, what would you tell yourself then, going back, but you just said it.
Yeah.
Be vulnerable, be open.
Just back yourself.
All right.
Yeah, and nobody's going to die, right?
Yeah. And finally, if I could give you an unlimited supply of one thing for the rest of your life, what would it be?
It definitely wouldn't be money. Money only gives you choice. That's what I have learned with that. So definitely not that. Most people would, I think a lot of people would go to that square. Being content. There's not enough. And sometimes you even go through yourself. Sometimes actually you're not quite content. And I've definitely learned over the years to just be happy with what you have. And sometimes good is good enough. So just be content. I think
it's tricky, right? To do that sometimes.
Really tough. The amount of, and actually interesting, the most people I meet who, again, back into that, who have got financial freedom, got all this money and success and profile in the world, are actually the least content people on earth. And it bugs me. It really bugs me. So just be content.
No, thank you. Now, Steve, obviously it's been my job to work out this superpower, and this is a tricky one because I have so many directions I could go in, but I don't like to give generic, superpowers here, because I think throughout your career and your whole life, things keep showing up. You've talked about never having an ego, both yourself and those around you. You've clearly inspired a lot of people. And it's hard to put a word on you, if I'm honest. But there's something more than anything that really stands out that I feel in every person you've clearly met, in the way that you speak, in the careers that you've had, the leadership positions. You're just incredibly human. And I know this is quite a generic one, but it's not generic, should I say, it's quite specific. I feel like you're just incredibly human and incredibly real as your superpower. You don't have clearly you don't have any ego yourself, but you've just got that grit, the down to earth. It's not even just groundedness or humility. It's so much more than that. And I feel that you walk the talk. People can give a good chat, but clearly your actions throughout 51 years have backed that you're such a great human being. And
appreciate that.
Oh, I mean it. From St. Basil's guy, people could sit on a train and, not intervene with those chaps.
Yeah.
And that led to, changing somebody's life.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you to be a good human? Because I think it shouldn't be that difficult, yet so few people seem to bloody do it.
You know what? You're right. And, just you bringing up the train thing there, I think it's sometimes doing the right thing is the hard thing. But sometimes you have to do the hard thing, right? So, that's blown me away, actually. I've never been described as that. I've been described as a lot of things, generally by my wife, actually, but not like that. So that's, super, super humbling, actually. So thanks for that. I think it comes back to maybe my upbringing of, and I said it earlier, I think just treat people right. And as I said, do the right thing. Sometimes, as I said, stand by your principles, don't go with the pack. And I love people who actually stand up for, as I said, just doing the right thing and acting in the right way.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, we all make mistakes. I've made lots of mistakes and you don't always get it right. But having the ability to sort of say sorry and just apologize and go, actually, I got that wrong. And, it's unbelievable when people do that and show a little bit of humility and honesty and vulnerability, actually, the impact that it has on other people. So that's blown me away. Thank you.
No, thanks. I was going to ask you what you'd advise people, but you've just said it again. Be vulnerable, be open, check your ego, I think is one massive thing. Right?
Yeah, and I go back to what I said, back to my dad's advice is just stop and think and have a look at your friendship group on a personal level, but also your friendship group within business is effectively your leadership team or your peer group. And just have a little look around and go, actually, am I surrounded by the right people? Yeah. And sometimes when you pause and stop, sometimes the answer to that isn't always, yes, that's correct. And that doesn't mean to say you get rid of them or you defriend them. I think it's about giving them feedback at that point and giving them live examples. So, but yeah, just stop and pause and go, actually, are these people good for me and good for my life? Because if they're not, and they're not going to listen to feedback, then maybe they shouldn't be part of it.
And finally, Steve, just to kind of finish us off there, let's go forward, 70 years, and people are talking about Steve Hewitt. What do you want people to remember you for?
Being kind, I think. I'll give you a little snippet of, somebody said to me, what's the best advice you've ever had? Now, normally I've met some wonderful people, Sir Richard Branson, some wonderful people within the business and in the sporting area, actually. And the best bit of advice I ever heard, it was from my daughter's year 6 primary school teacher, Mr. Hanson. So Mr. Hanson, if you're listening, thanks for this advice. And he was at the end of year assembly. You can picture the scene, right? Lots of emotional mums and dads. The dads probably wouldn't admit to that. Their kids are going on from primary school to big school, big moment. And Mr. Hanson stood in front of all the kids and the parents and he said, right, kids, this is where I should tell you to go and be successful. Work hard, go and get a degree eventually, go to university, do all these things. And he said, just be nice. And I sort of hung on to that and thought, Mr. Hanson's definitely onto something.
Wow. Well, shout out to Mr. Hanson. Clearly his nice message is all wrapped up in everything you do today and, what you do for so many. So
thank you,
Steve. Thank you so much. I feel like there's so much, and I like it because it's been so practical. I feel like so many entrepreneurs, founders, business people can take stuff away from you. And I think if they do one thing today, it's just go and be nice and clip their ego.
And I love the graph of life, by the way. Yeah. Really good. And thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you soon. Huge thank you to you, our listeners, for being part of our community by watching, subscribing, liking, and also leaving comments on all of our videos. It truly means so much to us, and it helps us to grow the show, making it possible for us to invite even more amazing guests for future seasons. And if there's someone you'd love to see on the show, do let us know. Your suggestions help us bring on incredible guests that you really want to hear from. Feel free to leave those in the comments or send a message directly to me on my social channels at @GianPower. We'd love to hear from you. Have you found the episodes? How have they made you feel? Have they inspired you, challenged you in any which way? Share your experience. We always love to hear your stories. And we've got some super exciting plans ahead. And with your support, we can take the Superpower podcast to even greater heights. So if you're enjoying the show, please hit that follow button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. And hey, if you're watching on board your in-flight entertainment, remember to follow us when you land. Or if you've got Wi-Fi in the sky, hit that follow or subscribe button now. For now, thank you once again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Superpower Podcast with me, Gian Power.